Alright, welcome to the menu series where we're gonna be utilizing Unity's UI system to the fullest. Really, we're gonna be just learning how to use the thing all together and mastering it together until we get to the point where we can do whatever we want with it. Make any kind of UI, make RPG battle systems, make inventory systems, whatever we need to do in order to get through this. We're gonna start off really simple with a start menu today. So we're gonna be making something that looks kinda like this. It's gonna say something like menu mayhem or whatever we're going to name it in the end. We're going to be able to hit the play button and then boom, it's going to bring us to this screen right here with a sound effect, and it's just going to say game placeholder or whatever. So get started on this. Let's make this project. So opening Unity Hub, we can make this project ourselves. Let's go ahead and go to new over here. I'm going to actually click this arrow so I can select my version because I have so many versions on mine. I'm going to use 2019.4.10, which is the latest LTS version at the time of me making this video. Now I recommend using either the universal render pipeline or the high definition render pipeline. If you don't know which one you want to use, I definitely recommend using the universal render pipeline. The reason why is because Unity's focusing a lot of the newer features on the scriptable rendering pipelines, which is these two pipelines right here, whereas they're not actually building in a lot of the new features into these built-in render pipelines that are inside of here. So these three pipelines right here. So universal render pipeline, you can say menu, I'm going to name this one menu Maelstrom. Create. Once it starts creating, it'll load it up. It's going to take 2 billion years to load because of all of Unity's like test things, like their examples for the universal render pipeline, which I really wish they didn't include. So I'll fast forward this and I'll see you, when I'm old. Okay, so it finally loaded up, and you look over here and we have this whole like example scene that's already set up, and this thing bogs down my system, so I don't actually want to keep it inside of my game at all. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go file, new scene, to actually make our whole game scene. And if you open up your scenes folder right here, you can actually delete that whole sample scene and not have to deal with it anymore. And there's a ton of sample assets and stuff that comes with this that are just for that sample scene, but I'm not going to do anything about all that. It's just beyond the scope of this tutorial. Okay, so we got this scene set up now. Well, we got the scene created at the very least, and we can now do something with this. And this is going to be our game scene. This is going to be that scene that says placeholder game, because that's all we need for this tutorial, a scene for our start menu to go to. Now, you might think that's unrelated to the UI system, but think about it. We have to actually put those words on the screen, and that uses the same exact system as we're going to be using to create the start menu. So don't feel like this is unrelated. In order to get started here, we have to right click on Untitled over here. We go to Game Object, and just like you create other 3D objects inside of here, you can go down to UI, and this gives you a whole bunch of options. In this case, we're going to go to TextMeshPro, and this will actually give us some words on our screen. Now, the reason why we're using this option versus the classical text option is because the TextMeshPro option is just superior overall. It gives you a lot of different options for how your text is going to look and work. It's more crisp. It's an option that Unity bought out from the asset store because it was so much better than their option. So go ahead and click this TextMeshPro, and it'll give you an option to import it. It'll say TMP importer. This stands for TextMeshPro. You hit import TMP essentials, and there you go. You now have it in your project. You don't need to get the examples and extras. You can tell by me deleting that scene earlier that I'm not all about that. You hit this X button and now it's out of our way. Now, the thing about UIs is that they're 2D. We need to actually see them in 2D in order to get a good view of how it's going to look in our game. If we hit the 2D button right here, our game scene will go to 2D mode, and now we can see it like this. And look, we can zoom out with our mouse wheel, and you can see that new text, and you can see this whole square as if that's our screen on here. Now this is important. This is how all the UI system works, because previously we didn't have anything to represent our screen, to represent how our game is going to look. If I go into the game, you can see this text over here on the bottom left and how it's like kind of cut off right there with the W. You see over here the square is cut off at the same exact point as if that is our screen, because this is a representation of the screen itself, this rectangle right here. What's this called? It's called a canvas. This is the basis of how Unity's UI system works right here. This canvas represents our screen, and it's where we build in our whole UI. The reason why it represents our screen is because of the component over here saying screen space dash overlay. If we change this option, you can have some other options, but most of the time when you're making start menus and most menus that you're going to be making, you're going to be using screen space overlay. You could use camera. I hardly use that. World space I use for things like health bars and things like that, but for the most part I use screen space dash overlay. So really this component component right here, this canvas component, is what gives us the ability to have something to put our UI on, hence the name canvas. You know, like a canvas that somebody paints on. This is the canvas for us to build our UI upon. If it wasn't for this canvas component, then this would not exist. Now, we also have this text component. This is what we actually created. The canvas component was automatically created because it needed something to be put on. If I try to drag this outside of that, notice it just vanishes. There's no words anymore. It's still in the same spot, but it's not there anymore. It doesn't work anymore because there's nothing for it to be drawn upon. Where's it going to put it? It's in a 3D world. How is it going to know where to put it on this big open 3D world? We could mean to put it anywhere. We can mean to draw it anywhere. There's nothing for it to draw upon. So we need this canvas in order for the text to work, for any UI element to work within Unity. Now, as long as we're on this rectangle tool, we can now drag, well, first I'm going to make it a child of the canvas again so that it actually shows back up. And then we can drag this wherever we want. We can just simply left click, hold down, and drag it around. And we can just set it here in the center, for instance. Notice that the anchor is there in the center as well. If we go to where it says new text over here on the right, we can change what it says. We're going to say game placeholder, or placeholder game, I think actually rings more true. We can scroll down a little bit and make the text size a lot larger. Let's say we make it 72, or yeah, 64 maybe. Let's do 64. Let's click this blue dot over here on the bottom right. Left click and hold down, and if we try to move this around, you see that we can change the size. If we hold Alt, it'll make it so that it grows from the center instead of just like growing on the bottom right there. And we'll just kind of make it so it's about matching the size of that text. And then we can look inside of our game, and looking pretty good so far, sort of. It's kind of blinded out by the sky behind it, so let's get rid of that sky. We can click on our main camera, and go down to where it says environment, and we can click off of the skybox, right, and go to solid color. Once we go to solid color, we can now change the color of that background. Notice it's automatically this blue color. It's going to give you guys a nostalgia if you're used to old school Unity, because that's what all the games used to have right off the bat back in the day. And we're going to go down here to this background color right here, and we're going to just simply change it to something else. I'm going to deepen up my blue. I want it to be like I'm staring off into the ocean. I'm going to make it a little bit more navy-y. We're going to desaturate it a ton because that's what we do nowadays. We don't like to have our colors too bright. We desaturate the baloney out of it. And we got it pretty good right here. Nice. Now I want to show you, like, keep in mind how much space is over here. If I hit play, this is going to look exactly the same. This is what our game looks like now. But if I hit maximize on play and then I do the same thing, notice the blank space around the words. The size of the words are exactly the same, but this blank space around these words has grown quite a bit larger because the screen space has grown. Now, what happens if you want these words to grow along with that blank space? Because think about it, do you want your start menu to be a smaller size if somebody has a higher resolution screen? Like, what if somebody has a 4K monitor? Do you want this text to be 1/4 the size of this? No, you don't. So how do you fix that? Well, if you go over here to the canvas, there's another component inside this. And remember, components are what give your game the functionality. Anytime you're trying to create some functionality, you know, we need to create like a canvas to put our UI upon, you create components. You don't create game objects. Like, you do create game objects, but it's not the game objects that give you the functionality. It's the components that give you the functionality. So anytime you're feeling lost, try to learn a component that fixes your problem. So over here we need a component to fix our problem, and there's this useful thing that's automatically put on the canvas called a canvas scaler, and this changes the way that the UI elements on the canvas, the children of this, actually scale on this canvas. Right now it's at constant pixel size, which is why these words stayed the same exact pixel size even when this canvas got quite a bit larger when we maximized it on play. So in order to make it so these words actually get larger along with the screen size getting larger, you can actually hit this constant pixel size right here. You can go to scale with screen size, and that'll change it. And it automatically actually already tries to scale it with the screen size, scales it based on the text that we have on there. That's okay. I'd rather it be a little bit larger than I had it at the beginning anyway. And this looks pretty good to me. Notice the amount of blank blue space. If I hit play now, it stays pretty much the same. There's about the same proportional blank blue space on the screen as there was before, which is just great for us. So now that we've got this, we've got our placeholder game set up and we've created our first UI. Notice that we have the canvas, and then we can create the UI elements on top of the canvas. So now we can go ahead and save the scene. We're going to go ahead and hit save, and then we go over to scenes, and then we can go ahead and just call it the game. And there we go. We now have a game scene. We can hit File, New Scene. And now we're over here back inside of Unity. Or, well, we've been in Unity this whole time. Well, we're back inside of a new blank scene. And this is where we're going to create our actual start menu. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and right click on Untitled. We're going to go Game Object, UI. And then we can create our first UI element. This time we want a background of some kind. So when we're creating this background, a good way of doing it is you can just use this panel. And a panel, what it does is it just creates something that's an image the whole size of our screen, the whole size of our canvas, and that will actually give us a really cool background image that we can use. Notice that on here, on this panel, there's actually an image component, and that image component is actually what gives us that functionality, what gives us that image on there, and that's what actually gives us this source image right here. So we can actually change the image that's on there, which is right now just a blank image, and we can mess with it. Now if we go to the game, notice it's like the see-through color, just like a white film on top of our skybox basically, and that's because this panel is see-through right now. If we click the color on here, you're going to see that the alpha is set up so that it's actually somewhat see-through, and if I go more to the left, it'll get even more see-through. If I go to the right, it'll become a solid color. Go all the way to the right, and then we go over to the game, and then boom, you can't see no sky anymore, which is kind of how we wanted it. So now we have this background image, but we don't really want to use this image. Let's actually go to the Unity Asset Store, find a set of images that we want to use for our UI so that we could skin this bad boy up now. So we search Unity Asset Store in Google. You can just go ahead and click the first option. All you need to do is click on 2D like so, and then you open it up with this arrow over here on the right. You can click on GUI, then you want to click on pricing down here below this, and then you're going to click on free assets. Once you click on all those things, you're going to have all these options. You're going to see, I've liked using the Simple Fantasy GUI for my test runs of the system, so let's go ahead and click on that. Yours is going to say something like add to Unity or something like that. You're going to want to go ahead and click that. You might have to sign in and get through that. I have faith in you. You can follow those steps. Once you get to the point where this says open in Unity, click on open in Unity. Then you have to click on open in Unity editor over here. It'll pop open your package manager. You'll have to hit your download button. It'll download really fast, and once it's done downloading, you'll have to hit your import like me, and then we're just going to scroll down here. We're going to not import their scenes. I don't want to import their test scenes. And then we're going to import everything that's inside of there. And voila, just like that, we have images loaded into Unity. We're going to click over here to Simple Fantasy GUI, and then now we have access to these PNG files. We're going to go over here, and the one I'm going to particularly be using today is this menu panel. We go over here to this menu panel. We're going to click on the panel right here. We're going to click this lock over here on the top of our inspector. So that makes it so when I click on this stuff, this doesn't change in the inspector. It just stays the same. I want this menu box right here. We're going to drag it over to our source image over there on the right on our panel, and then voila, it has this. Notice that it has some blank space around it, and if we go to the game, you can actually see the skybox behind this, which I think is pretty cool. I can change the skybox to match the theme later on if I want. I'm not gonna for this video, but I think I can do like a cool, like, you know, Japanese red moon sky with like a Japanese background. I think it'll fit in really cool with this image, with this theme that we're using. Anyway, we've got this now set up. Let's actually rename some stuff now. Let's rename the canvas to start menu. And let's rename panel to background. And just like that, we have this whole setup. First thing first is create a title. So we're going to right click on background. And notice we're following the same pattern that we've always been following. We right click on whatever we want to add our UI element to. And then we just simply go to UI, and then we add whatever we need. In this case, we're going to add another text. That's TextMeshPro because we're adding a title. The only options for text are these two options right here. And we like TextMeshPro around here. Now we can just simply drag this up here. We're going to unclick this lock right here so that it actually shows us our text options. And then we're going to change this to Menu Maelstrom, or whatever you want to name your game. I'm going to up my size over here to about 64, maybe larger. And I want to align my text to center and center. That makes it so that it'll just stay inside the center of this box at all times, and it'll be a little bit easier on me. Now, I forgot to actually click on my start menu right here and to actually change the canvas scaler. I don't want it to be the constant pixel size. I want it to be scale with screen size. And notice it pops up way up here. Why did that happen? Well, if we go back to the text, you see that the anchor is way down here right now, right? And so it's going to be basing where these words are at based on where that anchor is at. So we don't want it to be way down here. If you left click in the middle of that anchor, you can actually move it around, right? And we're going to want to move it to the top, tip top right there, so that when it's scaling, it's going to scale based off of that location, based off this anchor location instead of based in the middle there. If I hit Control Z, it'll undo that, and I'm going to show you the effects of this here in a second, what leaving this anchor here does. So we're going to go down, and we're going to drag it down to right about there. So that's right at the tippy top of our little menu system there, right on that line. And we're going to go to the game, and it shows up. But we're going to maximize on play now. Notice where the bottom of this word is at on that line. And I'm going to hit the play button, and notice it's hovering above that line now. And that's very much because of where the anchor is at. It's trying to stay the same distance from the anchor relative to the screen, which is really tough for it when it's scaling things. But if we have this anchor kind of go up here, let's say that we start right here on the line itself on the anchor, and then we hit the play button, then notice the effect is not near as pronounced. It's very tiny on there, but it still happens. And we can even do it so that it's based on the top here. We can try different things, and actually it's not pronounced at all. So it worked out pretty well there by putting it on top. So you can try different spots for your anchor. In this canvas's case, this is a good example because all this blank space on here makes it so you kind of have to do a custom anchor on there. And notice that we were able to fix that problem just like that. So we're going to change this name over here on the left hand side to title for our text, and we're going to want to make a different font here. We're going to want to make it use the font that came with this fantasy GUI. If we click over here on the left hand side, the font, you'll notice that there is a cool font that comes with it. Now if I lock the screen back in and I click on this font and I try to drag it in, it doesn't work because it's called a font asset for some reason. It's not actually just called a font, and that's because of, again, TextMeshPro. They have their own font system, is what allows for it to be a very crisp picture like this, a very crisp font. So in order to use that nice crisp font, we need to use some TextMeshPro functionality here. We go to Window, TextMeshPro, we go over to Font Asset Creator, notice the Font Asset Creator, and then this will pop open. It's a cool little wizard. We simply drag over our medieval sharp right into there, and I found that you don't really need to change any of these other settings. Literally every time I've made a font with it, I've never messed with a setting before. You hit Generate Font Atlas, you hit Save, you go right into the folder that you for your simple fantasy GUI font, hit save, and then boom, you'll see it pop up. You drag it over, and there you go, you have the font. Simple as that. You might want to drag it down a little bit just so it's back on that line. We hit the play button just to test to see if our anchor's still working, and it is. Look at that, it's beautiful. Perfect, right? You might want the text to be a little bit larger, so I'm gonna up it to 72 instead. I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger. I'm using my Alt key to make it uniform, and I like it so that it goes above a little bit. Notice that it goes above the menu a little bit. I think it's a cooler look for it. Notice I'm not changing any colors yet. It's not a cool looking color. It kind of sucks right now. Definitely not really matching up with this theme at all yet. That's okay for now. We will be working on that color in a little while. So let's go back over here and start adding some buttons, because what's a start menu without buttons? We can't start anything. And how do we do that? Well, same pattern. We right click, go to UI, and we create a button. And we're going to use the button with TextMeshPro. Why is TextMeshPro making buttons? They're actually talking about the words on that button. So right here, this button right here, we'll just use the classic text, whereas this button right here, we'll use TextMeshPro. And then voila, we have a text with TextMeshPro right there on our button. And if I open up this button right here, you'll see the child of it is those words, that button word right there on this, and that's the TextMeshPro version. Now, the first thing here is if we hit the play button and we go click this button, notice it automatically has the functionality where it kind of darkens up like that, right? It darkens up when my mouse button goes down, and then it lightens back up to its normal self when my mouse button goes up. The way that it's doing those transitions is if you look over inside the components, the thing that's given the functionality, the component over here, is this color tint transition on the button component. So you see over here, transition, color tint. Notice that this press color is a little bit darker than the other colors around there, and that's what's giving us that kind of darkening effect. Well, the thing is, a lot of these classic systems, a lot of these like things that you'll download will actually have some other cool options inside of it, and this one's actually maybe not even built for how we're about to use it, but I like how it functions like this. So let's go over to button, and let's lock it in again, and let's actually just kind of drag in this on the source image right here, on image source image. You're gonna drag in the button right here. You're gonna get their little cool button effect right there, right? And then instead of making the transition a color tint, let's actually use Sprite Swap, and this will make it so, okay, we start off with this button, this image right here, this one that we started off with because we put it right here in our source image. And then if you go over to press, so what it's gonna look like when we press the button, we're gonna switch it over to this one right here, to this button shadow. And check this out. If we hit the play button now, boom, right? A much more pronounced effect. It's very powerful compared to what we had before, and kind of just really feels like it's going down. So I really like that. I think it's a cool pressed effect. Let's go ahead and roll with that for now. What else can we do inside of here? Well, there's some other like options inside of here that are kind of self-explanatory, like highlights. If you're hovering over it, it'll change to this highlight sprite and so on. We're not gonna mess with any of those other options inside of this video right here. The big problem here is the button text right here is very ugly. It's super ugly. It doesn't match up with the color scheme at all. So let's actually unclick this lock right here, have our text selected, and let's go down over here inside of the TextMeshPro options, and notice that there's this thing called vertex color, and that'll allow for us to pick a color for that button text. We hit this button text right here, we can go over to this color picker, and what I want to do is go over to our screen and pick this really light color over here, so it almost looks like we have a see-through carving of button inside of there. Also, I want to go over to this liberation font. We're going to hit the circle, and we're going to go to medieval sharp so it matches up with our font from earlier. Check that out. We have this cool button text now inside of here. Now we're going to want to actually go over here inside of our assets folder. We're going to go to create, and we're going to make a new folder to put all of our prefabs inside of, even though we're not creating that many prefabs inside of this one. And we're just going to drag over our whole button, and there we go. We now have a prefab of that button, which is pretty good. We're not going to really be using it, but it's just best practice, because a lot of what we do inside of Unity is we kind of build a lot of like base systems, and then we continuously use those base systems over again. We built all the functionality for our button that we want for our theme here, and it works and everything, right? It looks cool, it works, but we don't want to have to build that again when we're switching this around. Now this button right here, we're going to be changing it to the play button. We'll rename this right here to play text, or play button text, actually makes more sense. And then if I go over to the text over here on the right, we can simply say play, and notice just like that we have a whole play button. We can now move it up to wherever we want. Now if we select this play button, we hit Control D, it will duplicate it, and then we can move it down, and just like that we have a new button. We can then name this button something like, oh, I don't know, settings button, and then we can rename this to settings button text. And then we simply go over here to the right hand side and write settings, and just like that we have a whole nother button. And because we have that whole base functionality of that button built in, we don't have to build it over again, guys. All that like making the color and making it so it turns to the shadow and changing the text font, that's all done because we did it once and then we duplicate it. Same thing with the settings button. Select it, Control D, drag it on down about there, just have to eyeball it. Gonna go over here, we're gonna name this to quit button. Then we're going to name this one the quit button text. Then we're going to go over here to text and name it quit. And just like that, we have all of our buttons made. We're going to have them all anchored here in the center so that they're all about equal distance. Now that we have this kind of whole color scheme already built in, we can actually finish the color scheme of our title up here on the top, because we now have like all the rest of the colors kind of preset here that we're going to be using inside of this. So we go over here to our title, and we go down here to where the vertex color is, and you notice we can just change it. So if we just select it here, we can just select this red, for instance, and then just have it match up. But I kind of want it to be a little bit fancier than the rest of it. So we're going to actually pick color gradient over here. We're going to go back to vertex color. We're going to select the white color all the way over here on the top left of the square. And the reason why we're selecting white to start off with is because this color will actually end up changing the color gradient if we don't change that. So we're going to use the color gradient here. And the four corners, this is top left, bottom left. The thing is, I don't want to do that complicated of a color gradient. I just want a vertical gradient. So if I click over here on vertical gradient, this is now just the top and this is just the bottom. We can then hit this little eyedropper. We can hit this red right here. We do the same thing over here for this red, and notice it looks exactly the same as if I had just changed that vertex color. Well, I want to start with like a base color here before I start messing with things. So now if I click on this color on the top, this will change the top color for us. I want to lighten things up quite a bit. We're going to go up towards the top left. If I go way up there, you should see a big difference. Now it's going to be even more pronounced of a difference if I darken up the bottom right here, the bottom color. If I darken it up to about there, maybe even go like that. There we go. It gets very pronounced. Let's actually go even brighter color right there. And there we go. Menu Maelstrom is now complete. We created a cool color gradient. It looks a lot cooler. And it doesn't just kind of like show up as the same color as this right here, right? Just like that, we were able to create like a cool gradient on our text. And this is also the reason why we use TextMeshPro. It's a great system, guys. I'm really glad that Unity bought it out. All right, so we've got everything built in. Now it's time to actually build some functionality here, because this thing does nothing right now. I hit the play button, I hit the buttons, and sure, they look nice. Yeah, very good. But they don't do anything. So how are we going to do something? Well, first we're going to have to talk about how this system works. It's really cool how Unity has it set up. The way that the system's made is if you scroll down to button, there's this on-click event inside of here, right? Now, the way that you can go about using these on-click events is you literally just hit this plus button. It'll bring up a Unity event here. You can drag any object inside of here, for instance. Let's say, for just the sake of discussion here, we drag in our start menu, and we can look into the function built into the components on here, and we can access any of them. Because everything here is a game object, we can select a game object. We can actually hit this set active bool, for instance, and we can set it to false, which is the equivalent to unchecking this box here. And now that will happen when I hit the play button. So if I hit play, I hit the play button, notice the whole thing disappears. We control that functionality right here inside of this on-click event, right here into this button, and that's spectacular. Hit this minus sign, now get rid of that event because we don't want it to be disabling our box here. But it's amazing that we have that ability. And so a lot of what we do here, a lot of what we do when we're creating the UI system and making these buttons work, is we literally just create functions inside of our own scripts, and we then just control when those functions are activated by going into these kind of on-click events, or whatever event is built into the system for the UI element that we're using. Here, let me actually show you what I'm talking about. For instance, if I create a UI and then I create a slider, right? If I create a slider right here, you guys don't need to do this. If I go down over here, notice on value change is what happens in here. So whenever this value right here is changing, it'll actually trigger an event, and we can actually link that up into a script, right? Which is pretty cool. So anyway, I deleted that. We're going to go back in here. Let's actually start with our settings button then. In fact, what we're going to be doing here is we're going to actually create a whole settings menu. So what we're going to want to do, first off, let's create an empty game object that's going to have all of our menus. And let's make our start menu a child of that. Then let's duplicate our start menu. Let's deactivate our first one right here so that our second one's only one popping up. And let's rename it to settings menu. Now we already have our title inside of here. So let's go over to our title, and then let's go over to settings. Let's just name it settings. Now, we don't need all these buttons on here, so let's get rid of both the play and the settings button. Let's go over to the quit button, let's make it a little bit lower, and let's actually anchor it to the bottom of the screen. So it's about the same distance from the bottom of the screen at all times, right? And notice that we have to go in and manually do that, because if we go and use their built-in functionality to anchor, we can click this right here and we can actually just set it up so it's on the bottom. And notice it goes all the way to the bottom of the screen though, because we have all that blank space on this image. So no worries, this is good practice. Left click and hold down on this anchor, and just drag it on up right there. Now, rather than quit, let's actually rename this to return button. And then let's go over here to the return button text, and let's rename that to return button text. And then we simply change it to return. Let's start off with this return button right here. I already showed you that we can deactivate one menu by just clicking a button. So what happens in here, if we go to our button itself, there we go. Go to our button, we go over to where it says on click, we're going to add a little functionality there. We're going to add this little ability to trigger a function. We're going to drag it into our start menu, and then we're going to set our game object set active, and we're going to set it to true, as if we're checking this box right here, right? But at the same time, we want to deactivate our settings menu, right? So we're going to add another function, drag in our settings menu, and then we're going to go over to game object, and we're going to go set active, and we're going to set this one to false. And just like that, check this out. When we're in our settings menu, we hit return, and then just like that, look at that, we're inside our menu maelstrom here, right? And we can do that same thing if we actually deactivate this, and then we reactivate our start menu. We can go into our settings right here, go on down. We're going to do the same exact thing. We can just drag in our start menu, and we're going to also drag in our settings menu. We're going to go to game object set active, game object set active, and then in our start menu, we want that to be unactivated, and we want our settings menu to be activated. So we hit our play button again, and just like that, we can kind of just go back and forth now between these two things. Pretty cool. We've built in our first button functionality. We did it all through Unity's built-in system here. We didn't have to do anything else because we already had those functions built in. But what happens when we need our own functions? Well, let's go to menus in general here, and let's just add a whole new script inside of here. We're going to call it button functions, right? Create an add. We're going to double click button functions to, well, build up some button functions. And just like that, we now have access to do some button functions. Now, I'm going to erase everything other than Unity Engine just so you can see what's going on. And really, all we need is one function here to do one thing. And we're going to say public void. It has to be public because we want it to be able to be accessed by that Unity event, that on-click thing for the button. So we want our button to be able to access this. So let's make it public void. And we're going to say play button pressed, right? Just to name it something. It can be named anything. And what we want to happen is we want to change our scene. In order to change your scene, you need to use the scene manager. And notice as soon as I hit scene manager, it loads in scene management up here, Unity Engine.scene management. And that's because if I hover over this, that is where this class belongs. It belongs to the scene management namespace. So if I go scene manager.load scene, and we're going to just load the scene named game because that's what we named our earlier scene. We're going to go back inside of Unity. We're going to actually save the scene. So let's hit Control S. Let's go into our scenes. Let's call this the start menu. Let's hit save. We're going to hit the play button. We're going to hit the play and it's not working. Why is it not working? Well, that's because we didn't do anything with the play button. So we go to the play button. It's not enough to make a function. We have to actually hook it up. So let's hit this plus sign. We can drag in our menus, because that's where this function is built in. You go to button functions, and then we can say play button pressed right there. Again, we're going to hit the play button. We're going to try to do this one more time, and it still doesn't work. So we have to actually go to File, Build Settings, and we need to actually go to Scenes, and then we need to drag over these two scenes right into there, like that. You can delete the sample scene, and just like that, we have the game. And actually, I want it to be in the opposite order, so I'm going to drag the start menu up, and the game right there. And just like that, we actually have those inside of our system, and now it should work, because Unity actually knows that scene exists when the game is running. Hit the play button, and there we are in the placeholder game. Alright guys, we're nearly done here, so let's finish this bad boy off. And let's build the other functionality for these other buttons inside of our button script. There's a couple things that we want to do here. Let's actually go public void. We're going to say quit button pressed. And we're going to simply say application.quit. This doesn't work when the game is inside the editor, but when you build the game and then you run it, the quit button will work. It won't work while we're doing this tutorial, but if you build the game, it'll actually run. And then we're going to actually have one other thing is we're going to create a public void button sound, right? And we're going to want to create a button sound now to actually run this bad boy with. So in order to do that, we're going to go back to the Unity Asset Store real quick. So we go back to the basic Unity Asset Store. If you go over to audio, we're going to go to sound effects. And then we're going to, of course, have free clicked. And then casual game sounds is what I pick. Go open in Unity, or you're going to download it first. Just like you did last time. Hit download, import. And then we can just put all of them inside of our game real quick. Once it's finished, we can go ahead and use the casual game sounds. I like this fifth sound in this one right here. This is the one I'm going to be using for my button presses. So what we're going to do here is we now need to have a sound though. So we're going to actually right click on our start menu. We're going to create an empty game object. We're going to hit F2 to rename it. And we're going to go ahead and call it menu sounds, right? And then we're just going to simply create an audio source on it. This audio source will have the sound clip on it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This sound right here is the one I like. And just like that, I dragged it over to this audio clip and we now have access to that sound. All we have to do is access this component and play that sound. Now on this button functions, I'm going to want to have access to that sound to play it. So let's go ahead and go back into our Visual Studio, create a public variable real quick. That's audio source, because that's what the component's named. And then we're going to simply call this the button sound. And then we're going to say button sound.play. And that'll play that button sound for us. One thing that we need to do before we go any further on this is we need to go back to menu sounds. We need to click on this play on awake. This makes it so that it plays as soon as the game loads, and we don't want that. And we also want this big circle right here. If you drag the circle out, this will make it so that it plays basically everywhere. We want it to be very big. We want the sound to play basically anywhere inside of this world. And now let's hook up all these functions. We built all the functionality inside of here. We just got to drag this menu sounds over to our button sound real quick on our menus, and that'll create that sound linked into it. And let's actually create all this functionality here. So we go down to our play button, we add another function, we go over and we drag over our menus again, and then we go over to button functions, and then we can say button sound. So now it'll play that button sound. Go over to our settings menu, we add another function, we drag over our menus, we go over to button functions, and then we can say button sound. And just like that, we're adding this functionality to everything. And then we're going to hit the plus button here. We're going to drag over our menus on our quit button. We're going to go over to button functions, and then we're going to actually say quit button press. And then you know what though, I want to show you guys something different real quick. If I hit the play button, Why is it playing on awake? Hold on. Oh, I forgot to turn on play on awake, so that's why the sound just played. So let's go back to the menu sounds, click on audio source, uncheck play on awake. Hit the play button. No sounds playing, right? We hit our settings. The sound goes off. Return, we haven't hooked up yet. Settings, notice if I click it down though, no sound's going off. And then I let go, the sound goes off. Now, that might work for some things, but we might not like it in other things as well. So let's actually unclick our start menu. Let's click on our settings menu real quick to mess with our return button again. Let's click on return button, scroll on down, and instead of doing it this way on click, because that means when we lift up our button, when we stop holding the left mouse button down and we let go of it, and then the button sound goes off, then on click goes off. But what if we wanted to go off when the button goes down? So let's add a component called an event trigger, and this will give us more control over like how this event works inside of this system. And when we add this component, we say add new event type, and notice there's some other options here now. So say pointer down, instead of when we lift it up, it'll actually trigger when things are pushed down. So let's hit this plus button here. Let's drag over menus. Let's go over to no function and hit button functions. And then we're going to simply hit button sound right there. And check this out. I press down, I haven't lifted it up yet, and the sound goes off. I lift up and then check that out. So over here, it's not going to really make too big of a difference if you just click in fast. But it is a difference, and I wanted to show you that how the event trigger works. All right, we've basically got this all done, right? We got to still hook up the quit button sound, and then we got the play, but play doesn't work. Why is play not working? Well, the same function that we've used on everything else is on the play button. Let's actually deactivate our settings menu, get our start menu hooked back up. It is on there, it's there, it's just not working. And why is that? Well, that's because this is getting destroyed. We're destroying everything inside of here, our menu sounds included, when we're switching our screen, right? When we're switching scenes. If I hit the play button, we hit play, the button sound does go off there. It's just destroyed before we get anywhere. So notice that we have nothing in don't destroy on load. And we open up our game, there's no button sounds there. There's no menu sounds. That game object, this object right here that's playing our sound, doesn't exist in the next scene. Notice that when we switch scenes though, Unity automatically has this scene right here built into it. Don't destroy on load. That's automatically built in. We can add things to this. All you have to do is run a function called don't destroy on load at the beginning, and we're gonna just make it ourselves. We're gonna create something don't destroy on load so that we can add this to whatever we want later on. And then we're gonna create an add it, and then we're gonna double click it. We're gonna delete update because we don't need it. And we're going to go over here to start. We're going to write don't destroy on load, right? You just hit this. You need a target over here. We're going to type in our game object. That's us ourselves. And just like that, we now have this don't destroy on load for our game object. We get added into that. We have it here on menu sounds notice. We create a script so that we can add this component to anything that we want. We can add this functionality to anything that we want now. And then if I hit the play button and then I hit the play button, boom, that sound goes off. I hit the pause button and you can see menu sounds is right here inside of this. Just like that, we created a full-blown menu. Hit your save and it's all there. Let's go ahead and hook up our quit button real quick and then we'll do our final test. Let's drag over menus inside of this right here. We go inside the button functions and then we can go ahead and hit button sound, and now it should all be functioning correctly. There we go, guys. We've created an entire menu system together. I hope that you enjoyed this video, that you had a good time, that this is what you wanted to see. I know there at the end I did trying to like push through to do this faster because I thought that you guys would get this by then. You just build the functionality inside of a script, right? You make some public functions, then you can hook them up wherever you want, right? You can just hook them right up to these Unity events inside of here. And it gives you this modular approach to it. Once you build something once, you can use it a billion times if you want. All you have to do is click a couple buttons and then boom, you have all these built into your Unity editor. And you're going to find this, that we're doing things this way a lot, that we build these basic functions, these basic building blocks, and we can connect it inside of this system right here, because this is what we're trying to work with right here. So I hope you liked it. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment down below. I'm currently working on a Udemy course, to Metrovania. Let me know if you're interested in that. I have no idea if people are interested in that or not. Like, I'm gonna have like links to get it for $10 when it comes out. I hope that you guys like that idea. I don't know if you're gonna. If you want to support the channel, though, you'll be able to purchase that. It might even be out in the description below by the time you're watching this, unless you're watching it like within a month or two of when it came out. It should be coming out in November 2020. And that's about it for this video. I have a link to to my coffee account if you want to buy me a coffee, if you want to support this channel. But in no means, like, I always feel so dirty when I bring up like money things inside of these videos. I'm so thankful for your time. I don't need anything else. I'm very grateful that you sat through this whole video. Thank you so much. I hope you guys have a great day.